The session will conclude with a keynote by Ivan Sergejev. Ivan is an architect, technology enthusiast, and TEDx speaker, currently serving as a chief city architect of the town of Narva, Estonia. Ivan has gained different professional experience in both Europe and the United States, most notably as the world's leading Office for Architecture and Cultural Analysis, OMA, in New York City. During his Fulbright Fellowship at the Virginia Tech School of Architecture and Design, Ivan has co-founded the Interdisciplinary Research Honors Society, a US-based academic organization devoted to the promotion and recognition of interdisciplinary research. Ivan is an outspoken promoter of design thinking and an author of diverse publications related to architecture and design. Let's listen to Ivan's keynote, Narva, the city in between. Please welcome.
Hi. Okay, this works. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Ivan. I come from the town of Narva, which is in Estonia, the easternmost town of Estonia. This is pretty much what it looks like if you want a postcard view of the city. Just a quick, I mean, this has been already said. The important things probably about myself to add is that I am also one of the co-organizers of a music festival in Narva, and also I was the leader of the Narva's effort to become the European Capital of Culture in 2024. But so, in my case, I'll talk about a very specific city that I work in. I'm going to tell you about the ups and downs that we've had, a little bit of like a case study of going back to what Marcos said earlier, that there is a major city, then it branches out, there are smaller cities that grow, then it's kind of like an organic process. So in case of Narva, that's, I'm going to try and illustrate that a little bit. I'll try to be brief. But anyway, so Narva, yeah, as you can see, it's on the very eastern border of the European Union. The territory has been contested for centuries. So it's always been kind of run over by wars. The Russians wanted it, the Danes wanted it, the Swedes wanted it, like everybody. It was a very strategic place on the map. As of right now, basically, the joke that we have is that Narva itself is kind of like an okay city, but the suburbs are great. Like one of them is St. Petersburg, the other one is Tallinn. One is the culture capital of Russia. The other one is one of the most progressive and the fastest growing city in the Baltics. As far as urban morphology or like what the city looks like, it's essentially, well, of course, the territory of the city is a little bit bigger, but this is what we perceive as Narva, as the city of Narva. It's essentially a half circle, about 2 kilometers in radius. So it's a very walkable, very close-knit, but also somewhat homogeneous, or let's say dull city. It hasn't been like that always. Essentially, yeah, so what you see now is this kind of post-Soviet Narva the way it is right now. It hasn't always been like this. Narva is actually known as the Pearl of the Northern Baroque before the Second World War. So as I said, Narva used to be a very important, it's strategically very well placed and contested. So in the late 17th century, it was built as, well, essentially it had ambitions of becoming the second capital of the Swedish Empire that it used to be part of back in those days. So it was built in a very consistent Baroque fashion. It burned down in 1659 and then, built up in stone pretty fast. Since it was an important trade city, it was built fast and very consistent. So this is essentially what it looked like. This was the Narva's town hall square before 1944. But then, yeah, 1944, is basically the Narva got bombed throughout the war. There's been different attempts of, like the war front went over it multiple times. But 44 is where we could say that it was like, a 1-0, like Narva got just erased, essentially, from the face of the earth. Another very important aspect is that in case of Narva, the population was priorly removed. So they removed the population, then they bombed it. Why, is an open to, like the answer to the question why is open to interpretation, but the important thing that we take out of this is that essentially, in case of Narva right now, we only have a geographic spot, but neither the population nor the city fabric are what they used to be. So it's essentially a transplant city. So after the war, what was built up was this, a proud socialistic city that was mostly based on industry. So if before the war, Narva was a very multinational city, somewhat small, about 30,000 people altogether, where we had a Jewish synagogue, we had multiple churches, we had a Muslim prayer house. After the war, it became just this kind of socialist, industrial monocity, essentially. The avant-garde of the working class. And so Narva grew as if, on steroids, essentially. It became an 82,000 people strong city by the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed and Estonia regained its independence. So that really sprung a whole new era. So what we can see is that Narva was a center during, the 17th, 18th centuries. Then it became periphery in the Russian Empire. Then it became obliterated, and then it became a center again after the war because of its industrial production. And then in the 90s, it fell back down again. So basically, not everyone was up to, the whole new independence thing. Considering that the Narva's population is mostly comprised of people who are not tied to this land and who are mostly Russian-speaking, since they were literally imported into Narva from the east. So you have a situation where most of the people have most of their roots on the Russian side. The city is located right on the Russian border. A lot of families were split by the border that suddenly appeared. Obviously, it was not just the family and friendship ties that were split, but also the economy. So Narva's industry was mostly based or mostly oriented towards the east. It was catering to the Soviet Union's military, nuclear, construction industry, cotton, textiles. So once the border appeared, once the Soviet Union collapsed, essentially Narva found itself with an absence of essentially everything. Like, there was no point in that city anymore. So by the time, Vanya, which is, my name, went to first grade, essentially people were just starving on the streets and plagued by unemployment. So that's the kind of, situation that I found myself, or that I grew up in. I'm actually a Narva's local. So I grew up in Narva in that kind of, state. Then I move away, and then I come back in 2016. And what do I see? I see essentially the same thing. So it's, Narva is this post-Soviet typical kind of landscape of 5 to 9 story buildings, mostly white brick. The industry has collapsed and has not rebounded in most cases. So the demographic situation is not very promising. So we deal with the classical shrinking city. Narva has lost about a third of its population since the regaining of the independence of Estonia, so in the last, 28 years. Also, the pyramid, the demographics pyramid doesn't really look like a pyramid. It looks more like a tree. So obviously there's something wrong there as well. A lot of young people leave. Actually, on average, we lose about 700 to 800 people per year, which is a lot, considering that we have a population of, right now, 57,000 people. So, funny enough, though, we don't have a lot of empty apartments because people's use of space has changed. People occupy more square meters per capita than they used to. So we don't have the problem where we have to knock buildings down, although we've lost an entire third of the population, which is a really interesting aspect. But that's a different story. Another interesting thing with Narva is the ethnicity and the, ethnicity as in like language and citizenship aspects. As I said, the absolute majority speaks Russian. We perceive Narva usually as a monocultural city where there are only Russians. That is not entirely true. We do have a lot of other nationalities, all in all about 80, although some of them are represented by 2 people. But, we count them in. The other thing is that less than a half of the population of Narva actually has Estonian passport. So that is, I don't know what the composition is here in Latvia, but that is pretty unique for Estonia. Narva is pretty much the only town where you have that. So all of those tendencies, that's when I come back to take up my position as a city architect. But what I also see is that there's been certain things on the plus side as well. So for example, we've gotten the Narva College constructed. When I left town in 2006, this was not there. One of the authors is right here in the audience, Katrin Kov. But this building got erected. We also had the we also have the river promenade now, which is the absolutely favorite spot for anybody in Narva to be in. It's like one piece of public infrastructure that is a complete success. It's incredible. Again, not a lot of situations like this pretty much anywhere. So if you have the promenade on the right, you can see that there is a large drop, right? So those are the bastions, the fortifications of the old city, which are about 16 to 18 meters higher than the riverbed. So what you have is the promenade near the river, and then you have a promenade on top, which is called the Blind Garden. So there you go. Those are new things, right? Before it used to be just shrubs, now they're formed into a promenade and a park. We also have Narva Yoru Beach building. We have a new theater that was just opened half a year or almost a year ago. And there are also a bunch of projects in the works. For example, the network of bicycle lanes throughout the city, the new town hall, the industrial complexes are building up, like textiles, the Krenholm textile factory that is right now it's completely closed down, it's privately owned real estate, and it's 250,000 square meters. So it's huge. It's a city in its own right. It used to, give jobs to about 12,000 people. Now it's closed. But there are plans to establish a museum of textiles there. So there is an interesting development. So there are all these things going on, and then there's this general feeling of there is something brewing here, there's something going on. It's not all that bad. So it might be a shrinking city, it might be, there isn't a lot of employment and all of that, but there are certain things that are good. There is an optimism of sorts. But Narva is still a periphery. So all the way since the 90s until basically a few years ago, Narva has been this kind of easternmost city where only Russians live, kind of let them just be there. We didn't help the situation in 1993 when the local, politicians almost declared autonomy from Estonia. That doesn't usually help build relationships with the state when you try to declare autonomy. So, there's been a lot of mistrust. Essentially, nobody ever expected anything good to come out of Narva, but it was just kind of like, just let them be. But then Narva found itself in the middle of an international kind of polemic. So essentially, in 2014, once the whole Crimea situation happened, then we've had a lot of people who are asking the question whether Narva will be next. Essentially, if you look at the statistics I just showed you, right? So you have the majority Russian-speaking population, the unemployment is rampaging. Less than half of them are citizens of the country that they actually occupy. So it kind of makes sense that Narva might be the next, target in somebody's, occupation plan. And although the city has been trying to say that, hey, no, we really like it here in Europe, we really like it here in Estonia, we really like our incomes that are multiple times as high as in Russia, we really like our pensions that are again multiple times as high, we like the investments, 82 million all in all, that the European Union has invested into us. So we really are not planning to switch sides, but nobody seemed to be listening. So what we did at some point, we figured that there needs to happen, something really drastic needs to happen. And so what we did was we came up with a slogan, or a hashtag, which was Narva is next. Essentially, if somebody comes to you and asks if you're next all the time from the standpoint of international relations, and you keep telling that no, we're not, nobody's listening, then what you need to do is say, hell yes, we are. And then once the jaw drops, that's when you feed the information that we're next in a very specific kind of way. What we see as next is being, a new creative hub and this very unique situation within the European Union where you have a completely Russian-speaking town, which, actually abides by European laws and all of that. So there are a lot of interesting layers that you could use and build on, and that's what we perceive as next. And it also led to a very kind of logical next step, which was declaring that we want to run for the capital of culture, the European capital of culture. which I hope that you guys know about. Essentially, every year there are 2 cities within Europe who get a title of the European Capital of Culture. It brings a lot of investments, a lot of PR, a lot of good stuff. So we were like, all right, let's kind of go wild and declare this thing. And really, nobody expected. Like it was a massive success. So although we, as I'll tell you later, we didn't get the title, but the very act of a city who's been kind of staying in the corner somewhere, kind of daring to be like, hey, we think we're cool enough to go for it. It was a massive success in the sense of like, we have never had so much support from anyone in the last 25 years. It seemed like the entire Estonia was behind Narva's candidacy. It was incredible, because again, if you remember the black and white pictures that I just showed you, then it was a huge departure from that state. What happened was, tourism spiked like 25%, 23%, and then we've had like a sort of a cultural big bang. Suddenly, the promoters and producers discovered Narva as a new hot place to organize festivals and theater performances and things like that. It has also been very interesting to follow the news because Narva, which was, previously an international kind of thing, but in this context, suddenly became an international city in a completely different context. So, Helsingin Sanomat, the Nordic region's most read newspaper, The Economist, the New York Times, everybody found time to come and see what is the city doing, how are they accomplishing, how are they doing so well suddenly? How did they make this crazy transition? The important thing is that it wasn't only the outside interest, it was also inside. So when we were running for the title, we conducted an actual, study, and we discovered that 85% of the people supported our candidacy from the local community, which is a very important thing because you can import new ideas into a city and they will not take root, or you can, just kind of start doing something and see that the people support you, and then that gives that much more meaning to the city. So what the program concept is, or was that, collaboration, we positioned ourselves as a collaboration hub between Europe and Russia. Europe is on the left side, that's the Narva castle, and this is the Ivangorod castle, or fortress, on the Russian side. So you can see that it's really close. Actually, when the jury visited Narva, we had a little singing performance where we had a collective singing on the Estonian side and a collective singing on the Russian side without microphones, and they could sing a cappella across the border where NATO and European Union and the great political divides go. So it was incredible. It was almost like watching ducks go across the river without any visas. It was the same thing. It's like people can sing across the border. It was great. The second aspect was that we want to value what we have. And the third is that we want to use our post-industrial legacy to, kind of accomplish a jump into the future. Alas, somebody else had to celebrate. The title did go to Tartu, the second of the 2 cities that ran for the competition. But Narva is still not going to be, same again ever, I don't think. So what I wanted to ask was, whether it's a periphery of what we think Narva is, or whether it's a cultural, cutting edge, it's really up to us. And I do remind all of us architects here that globe is a globe. There are no borders. So it's, they're only in our heads, really, essentially. And what you need to do is just kind of try and figure out what the uniqueness is of your place, and then trying to develop it through it. And really, that's all from me. Thank you.